If we truly are transparent, if we do talk about losing money, will that cause donors to say, well, if you've been coming up that short over the last several years, why should I contribute any more? If we admit some of what's going on, then that's going to just make us look bad. The exact opposite happened. We went ahead and we're transparent. You could tell an instant change in the demeanor of people that donate in large ways, and it just gained trust and rebuilt trust almost instantly.
In leadership, the absence of clear guardrails isn't just careless, it's dangerous. In this episode, ECFA President Michael Martin sits down with Global Leadership Network President David Ashcraft to explore the hidden gaps in leader care and why accountability, guardrails, and honest conversations are essential for building trust and sustaining a healthy culture. What really struck me was David's reminder that expectations are good, but without boundaries and follow-through, they're just hopes. When we're intentional about care and accountability, leaders can stay the course and thrive. Let's dive in.
Well, hey, David, thanks so much for stopping by the ECFA podcast. How are you?
I'm good, Michael. Thanks for the opportunity. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, you too. Well, right off the top, I just want to say, so this is a Behind the Seal podcast. And obviously, one of the big developments at ECFA recently is the launch of this new leader care standard. And you and Global Leadership Network have been just such great champions for this standard. So want to say thank you for that. Thank you for helping championing this new standard, and also looking forward to your insights on the topic today.
Yeah, well, thanks so much. I mean, a critical topic and something that we at the Global Leadership Network have been through some difficult times because of some of these even topics that are included in that maybe were violated in the past around the GLN. So we're super sensitive to it. So appreciate you working on this. I think it's a great thing.
Yeah, you bet. Well, hey, we're all in this together, that's for sure. But I'd love to just start with that and say, you see a lot too as an organization interacting with leaders of churches and ministries, all across the United States, really around the world. So, David, when it comes to leader care, what are you seeing out there in organizations today that both encourages you and also at the same time, anything that concerns you as well?
Well, Michael, I would say maybe start on the concern side. And my experience both at the Global Leadership Network, I also lead an organization called The Advantage that's specifically touching pastors of the largest churches in Pennsylvania. And we've got about 65 churches out of the top, maybe 80 churches in size in Pennsylvania that we work with. And that's about a 2-year-old organization. And we first reached out to these pastors and said, would you just meet with us for a day to talk about how we can introduce more people to Jesus? And what we found in talking to them is just an overwhelming sense of isolation on the part of so many. And so what we realized both through the GLN and through the Advantage is lots and lots of content out there about how to lead well, content on how to take care of yourself and keep yourself out of trouble, but a lot of isolation. And so especially I don't know that it's especially true in larger churches. It's probably true in all churches where the senior pastors are just feeling lonely. Not a lot of people they feel like they can share with honestly. And so isolation. And I think that becomes a real concern in a lot of different areas that we can talk about further. But that's probably the concern side of things that I would have. Yeah.
And what would you say, David? Do you see that actually kind of getting worse over the years? Or do you feel like that's something that's just sort of always been an aspect of leadership and something that we just have to navigate?
Yeah, my guess is it's probably always been true. But my guess is also, I think it's been exacerbated through COVID, through isolation with COVID. I think, what I found, Michael, as pastors before COVID, we all thought we kind of knew what we were doing and we felt pretty good about our leadership. And then COVID came and just hit us in so many different ways, whether it was how to respond to COVID, whether it was the racial tensions that were going on and heightened at that time. And so I think pastors went from feeling like, yeah, I kind of have a handle on this to I don't have a clue what I'm doing anymore. And I don't know how to keep people in my church happy anymore. And so I think it knocked down the confidence level of pastors dramatically. And so maybe before there wasn't such a strong feeling of I need other people around me. Whereas now I think there truly is a sense that I'm alone. And what I just want is camaraderie. I just want to know that I'm doing the right things or that I could be doing things differently. And so I would guess it's probably worse now than ever.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. So definitely some hard times, right, that we've all experienced. But yeah,
And
I appreciate.
I was just going to say what's fascinating about that is, you would think through social media, you'd think through the way we're even having this call, you'd think that there's more opportunities to connect with people than ever. But I think when it comes to relationships that way, it's not so much via Zoom or teleconferencing. It truly is face to face, I think, is what people are looking for. And so, again, there's content out there galore, but the relationships are hard to come by.
Yeah, no, we definitely echo that. And I was just going to say, although obviously that's all been kind of hard for all of us to go through, I think definitely a healthy aspect of us all realizing this is a need in our lives. Like it's
Very
something
so.
that is wired into the DNA of how God created us. So I appreciate you bringing that out. And maybe that actually gets into the hopeful side as well, too, of just what encourages you? What are you seeing in pastors and leaders today, specifically around this topic of leader care that feels like maybe we're headed in a good direction?
Well, I think one, just calling it out, Michael, is huge. There's a tendency not to talk about things like that. And that only worsens the problem and probably just drives us further into isolation. And so I think the fact that you guys are working on it, so many are working on it, I think church boards are starting to sit up and realize they have some responsibility there. And that hasn't necessarily always been the case, I don't think. And so I think there's some positive steps from that regard.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. Well, I appreciated too, even what you mentioned here at the beginning of our conversation about the journey that God has had GLN through over the years, and kind of even what you guys have seen and the trajectory that God has you on as an organization. So I'd love to just open it up to and let you share whatever you might want to about kind of that story and what you see God doing in that way.
Yeah. Well, one of the biggest things I see, Michael, us really focusing on is just transparency. And I think in the past for maybe the GLN, but I think for a lot of organizations, a lack of transparency has maybe contributed to some of the problems that we faced. A lack of just acknowledging or admitting that there's been some critical errors made. And so whenever that happens, again, I think that just drives people deeper into seclusion or isolation. It just drives people deeper into not being authentic about what's going on. And so one of the things, I've been in the role of president and CEO of the GLN now just for about 20 months. So I'm still fairly new to the organization. I was a part of it as being a board member for about 6 years. I was a part of it as a host site partner church for about 20 years. I've attended the summit for probably 30 out of 31 years. So it's something that's I've been deeply involved with and very aware of what's going on. And yet, again, one of the things we're trying to focus on now is let's just be real transparent and let's be real honest about what we see going on and what's happening and not try to hide things. And so for us, not so much delving into the past and maybe some of the indiscretions that happened in the past, but really just saying, moving forward, what do we need to do to be transparent? Some of that even comes down to finances, and we had been struggling financially for 6 years since 2018, coming up dramatically short on funding. And so there was initially a response of, let's kind of pull in and protect ourselves and let's not talk about the shortfalls. And what we found is just being real authentic with our donors, being authentic with people and saying, look, we're struggling right now. Here's where we're struggling. Here's how much we've lost over the last several years, has really, instead of hurting our credibility, it helped our credibility with donors and people that we're closely aligned with. And so just the importance of authenticity, the importance of transparency is we're seeing in a big way.
Yeah, no, that's all really good. I'm curious as you say that too, of coming to that place of recognizing the value and the importance of transparency. Like, were there some tension points along the way in terms of like overcoming things that might have been a hurdle to get there? Any tensions along the way that you had to navigate?
Oh yeah, definitely. Probably more internally than anything else. And just the sense of whether it's staff or board worrying that if we truly are transparent, if we do talk about losing money, will that cause donors to say, well, if you've been coming up that short over the last several years, why should I contribute any more? And I guess my argument through the whole thing was people know we're struggling. They know it. And if we don't go ahead and be authentic about it, if we don't go ahead and be transparent about it, either they're going to think that, one, we're blind and we don't really see what's going on, or they're going to feel like we're trying to cover something up. And so rather than hurting us, it actually, instantly, as soon as we started talking openly, you could tell it instant change in the demeanor of the people that are heavily involved with the GLN, the people that donate in large ways. It gave us instant credibility and just changed the whole demeanor of the conversation. So yes, there were some real concerns internally of, oh no, if we admit some of what's going on, then that's going to just make us look bad, where the exact opposite happened. We went ahead and were transparent, and it just gained trust and rebuilt trust almost instantly.
Yeah, huge trust builder. So you were saying 30 out of 31 years being at the summit. So on a lighthearted note, what were you doing that 1 year that you didn't make it? I'm just kidding. You don't have to answer that.
That's a good question.
That's a pretty good track record.
Yeah. It's interesting. I just love being in environments. So probably the biggest thing for me, Michael, is I love being in environments with other leaders, and not so much for me to do talking. I love to watch and observe. And so if I could be ever in a room, whether it was small or large, where there were leaders that I respected and I wanted to learn from, I wanted to hear how they think, how they operate, how they make decisions, then I constantly, and I still do, put myself in those environments. And the funny thing is, for the first, 15, 20 years, none of those leaders ever had a clue who I was, nor did I need them to. I'm fine sitting in the back of the room and just listening and observing. And but I feel like a lot of the mentoring of my mentors in the early days, I learned in those kind of environments, and had the opportunity as time went on to get to know some of them and know them personally. But for the longest time, my mentors were people that I'd never had the opportunity to meet, and I was okay with that. I was still learning from them. So.
Yeah, I imagine. I was going to say too, having had such a long history, love for the organization, involvement, the way that it helped mentor and shape you. I'm also curious, in these last 20 months, what has God been teaching you about leadership? What have you been seeing kind of from a fresh perspective, even though, again, you've had a very long track record with the organization?
Yeah, well, my full background, I served as a pastor at a church in Pennsylvania for 32 years, and I stepped out of that role, not really ever expecting to step into the GLN leadership. I was going to be working primarily with what we call the Advantage here in Pennsylvania and focusing on Pennsylvania pastors. And I had been out of my senior pastor role. I still have a role at the church, but it's minor. And my wife, her name is Ruth. And about 3 months of my being out of the senior pastor role, she sat me down. She said, "You need to find something else to lead." And then she looked at me very seriously and she said, "And it's not me," meaning it's not her. And apparently I was giving more leadership and guidance around the house than what she was looking for. And she said, "I've done fine all of these years managing the house and leading here at home. I don't need you here telling me what to do." And she jokingly, I think seriously, but jokingly told me several weeks later, I was instructing her on how to make sure all the light switches on the wall were all either up or down in unison. And she said, that's kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, and said, "I'm done. I don't need you here telling me how to do things. Go find something else to lead." About that same time, the opportunity opened up at the GLN. And so your question was, what do I see happening with leadership now? And again, it's amazing to watch how pastors are still looking for mentors. And I think sometimes we think of a mentor as somebody that we sit down across a desk from, and somehow they just open up and share wisdom with us. And I suppose maybe in books it can be drawn up that way, but I tend to think it happens more oftentimes from a distance. The people that we wish would mentor us, they don't have time to sit down individually across the desk from us all the time, but they are willing to share wisdom in different settings. And so it's just gleaning from whatever we can. And so that's one aspect of mentorship. What that doesn't give is accountability relationship. And so that's a whole nother topic, but I think we can learn greatly just by sitting and listening and being quiet. And so I think pastors are starving for that kind of relationship, and not even just pastors. Most leaders, I find, still looking for that very much.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. And we definitely will dive into the accountability side of leadership here in a minute, and just the way that boards can also be helpful to leaders and providing care and support and all those things. But I'll just take this opportunity, David, just to say thank you. Thank you for the leadership that you are bringing to GLN in this season. Like you said, the needs of leaders for this kind of ministry it's never been more important. So thank you for your leadership. Thank you for what you're doing. It's exciting to see the trajectory that God has GLN on. So we're excited for you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And this is a kind of a labor of love for me. I have benefited so greatly from the GLN in the past and just being able to be around other leaders. And so it's something that I love. And so it's an easy thing for me to jump into and be involved in and appreciate it so much. Yeah. And I think there is a great future. We're just coming off of we do a pastors conference for the pastors that host and partner with us for the summit. And we're just coming off of that and just a great time of, relationship building, camaraderie, and learning. So yes, I thoroughly enjoy doing that.
That's so good. Well, coming back around to the conversation today about leader care and really the impact of trust too, which is ECFA's mission of enhancing trust. Curious, David, what you're seeing in terms of some of the gaps maybe that are in leader care today, not just for senior leaders, but also within organizations as well, and as part of kind of a leadership culture. What sort of gaps are you seeing?
Michael, I think that, so I'll step back a minute. Elmer Towns was a church leader. He taught at Liberty University for years. And back in the early days, he would always give the 10 largest growing churches. I think he even had a title of Mr. Sunday School. And so he would promote Sunday School, but then he started evaluating growing churches. And each year, every 5 years, he'd come out with a list of the 10 largest churches. And it was fascinating to see how that would continue to change. But I had an opportunity to be with him probably about 35 years ago. And he had a saying, and I don't know if it was original to him or not, but he would say, you don't get what you expect, you get what you inspect. And so we can expect things to happen, but unless we're going back and inspecting them, they probably won't happen. And that sticks with me in a lot of different ways as somebody that's leading a team or a staff, or even if you're leading volunteers. It's one thing to talk about what you want to happen. It's another to make it happen. And he would say the way you make it happen is just by inspecting and saying, okay, let's really look at and let's evaluate, is this happening or not? And I think when it comes to pastors and even board relationships, there's a lot of expectations that the boards have, but I don't know that we always go back and truly inspect and say, is this happening or not? And the word inspect almost sounds like a negative, like you're being doubted. And I don't mean it that way, nor do I think Elmer Towns meant it that way. But if you don't ask some questions, then you don't know if your expectations are being met or not. And then the leader who's under that board doesn't really know if it's important on the board side or not. So probably if you were to ask me one of the gaps, I think there's often not any set expectations that are actually written out, nor do I think that there's any inspections saying, how are we doing in just living out those expectations?
That's gold. I think you're exactly right. Just curious too, because I think whether it's boards that are providing oversight of leaders or leaders that are providing oversights of teams and ministry, I guess how we go about the inspection process is crucial. Not just the fact that we do the inspecting, but probably also the spirit and the way in which we do that. So any wisdom that you'd have to offer in that way, how can those that are in those kinds of oversight relationships go about doing that inspecting in a way that is life-giving?
Yeah. Well, I would say, first of all, even just having some expectations written out. And so does the organization have a plan? Does it have, this is kind of the way we operate? Oftentimes that's described as the culture of the organization, but is there really something put down on paper that says, or now maybe on your screen, but is there some place, is it recorded? This is how we expect you to behave. And again, that can sound negative, but it's not. It's really boundaries. The way it's often described to me is, are there guardrails? If you're heading down a road, are there guardrails? And the guardrails are really there to protect the individuals. And so without guardrails, if you're driving in a precarious road on a mountainside, you want those guardrails there because you feel like that's what's going to keep you from going off the cliff. And so I think we need those guardrails. So the first thing I'd say is, are there even guardrails in place, Michael? And I think a lot of organizations don't have that. And then if they do, oftentimes they may be reviewed when the person is hired, but that's kind of it. And they're not ever looked at again. And the expectation is, oh, yes, he or she are following those guidelines, but there's never any follow-up inspection as to whether they're following those or not. And usually it's not intentionally disregarding those, nor do I think if somebody drifts, it's intentional that they drift. I don't know that anybody sets out to drift, but drift happens. And without bumping up against those guardrails, then that's where I think we start getting into trouble.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up, because in the context of, again, this new leader care standard that ECFA has been advocating here for the last little bit. And really, again, we like to say the ECFA members are the real heroes of the story, because a lot of it's based on the feedback, the ideas and suggestions of our members in this space. But, as we were talking about this, we found that exact same gap too, of these are things that boards will often talk about through a hiring process with the leader, or maybe unfortunately in situations where there has to be some sort of a separation or things haven't gone well. And so boards are kind of looking at it at that point, but like, what about the middle?
Yeah,
and so exactly. If we expect boards to do that on the front end and maybe at the tail end, then why is there also none of that happening in the middle?
Well, the unfortunate thing is usually when they do it at the tail end, it's because there's been a mess up. There's been some kind of misstep along the way. Somebody's gone off the road or off the rails and gotten themselves in trouble. And so then they're looking back saying, oh my, how did we get there? We had these things written out, but how did we have this crash? And so, I think there is a gap in the middle. And Michael, the way we did it, so the church that I pastored was LCBC Church. It's a church in Pennsylvania, a church of about 22,000 people, each weekend. And so we had a staff of about 300 people. And what we did is when we finally wrote out kind of, here's the expectations for you to follow. And it's probably a 2 or 3 page document. But we then, with the staff, we sit down twice a year, and we call it an action development plan. And the supervisor, the director, will actually, together with that person, go through the entire document. And in that document would be, here are your job expectations for the role that you have. But it's also here's the way we behave. And so it talks about relationships with the opposite sex, or talks about the use or abuse potential of alcohol, and just real details. And so what we encourage the director or the supervisor is to truly read through that with them line by line and say any struggles in any of these areas, rather than just kind of handing them the document saying, are you doing okay? We feel like you're going to miss out on information. So truly going line by line, and not that I'm seeing behavior. I guess if there were behavior that was out of line, you could call that out, but it really isn't questioning that. It's more, how are you doing in these areas? Anything we can be doing to help you? And so it's bringing to mind at least twice a year, here are our expectations, here are the behaviors, here are the places where we feel like you could step out of bounds. And we're trying to keep you safe as much as we're trying to call you out or, scold you, kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm glad that you shared that practical example, because I was going to ask you, how have you as a leader invited some of that into your own life? And so was that the case at LCBC? Was this something that kind of started getting modeled first between you and the board and then the organization, or how did that all come about?
I think it was kind of happening all across the board. Early years at LCBC, when they would do, so I'll back up. The board does an annual review of me, or now Jason, who's the senior pastor. And early days when they would do those reviews, they would they would sit in the boardroom, they would come up with all their comments, and then they'd blend it all together. And so what you got was kind of a mush of a lot of comments, but they weren't real specific. And then we changed it, 10 or 15, probably 15, almost 20 years ago now, to say, no, let's actually have very specific comments that are more pointed. And, I always hope most of them are positive, but if there were questions they needed to ask, then let's go ahead and ask those questions and be pointed. And so that was modeled by the board in that review of myself. And then we continued to refine that and do that with the rest of the staff as well. The board still does an annual review, whereas with the staff, it's twice a year. But it's not even so much a review as it is just kind of a reminder of, here are the things that we're concerned that we keep in line, again, not to hurt you, not to hold you back, but actually let you thrive. And we've really found, Michael, that when it comes even to things like creativity, sometimes people think, oh, if I just got a blank slate, I could be so creative. And what we believe is you're actually more creative when you've got a box you've got to work in, and you've got to find creative ways to still get things done inside of that box or in spite of those limitations. So we found it to be a real healthy thing for the staff and a way that they can thrive. It's not something that holds them back.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of value in having a plan. And then, like you said, I'm just jotting down notes as you're sharing too, the expectations, inspecting. I think all of those are really good. Maybe shifting back to GLN too. I think one of the real unique opportunities that you have too is not just serving church and ministry leaders, but also leaders in business, government, sort of all sorts of leadership spaces. But I'm wondering too, especially as you think about David, leadership outside of the church, are you seeing too any noteworthy trends kind of along the same lines, like even outside of a church and ministry context, maybe some of these same principles applying? Like, are we all kind of waking up across not just leadership in the church, but elsewhere to the importance of this topic?
Man, I wish I could say yes. I think that's the case. I'm not sure that it necessarily is, Michael. So I know from myself personally and what we had at LCBC, our standards were probably a little more tight. And I shouldn't say our standards, but our checks and balances were maybe a little more tight than others. And I think the Me Too movement in society definitely caused people's boundaries to go up a little bit tighter. But there's some things that are just kind of common sense, at least in my view, where, I guess a board could choose to mandate these for their leaders. But for me personally, it's, I typically don't ever travel alone. There's always somebody with me. For many years, it's been Ruth, my wife, that travels with me, not meeting separately off-site with somebody of the opposite sex, and just a lot of things that on one hand, you kind of go, oh, that sounds like such a prudish thing. Mike Pence, when he was vice president, mentioned that in an interview, and he just got blasted for all kinds of things. And so on one hand, you think, I feel like a prude. On the other, it's just wise. It's just those boundaries are there to protect you. And so I think you kind of have to decide, do I want to risk slipping and falling in a way that I shouldn't, or would I really have some boundaries that are there to protect me? And, maybe one of the things, Michael, that we ought to say too, is I think one of the ways that keeps us from falling is just being willing to admit that we could. Yeah. And I think that I was talking to Peter Greer, who's the president of Hope International, and just a great organization. And Peter actually has a new book coming out. And one of the things he says is it's that unwillingness to admit that we could fall that oftentimes gets us into trouble. And so just the acknowledgement, first of all, that I'm a sinner, I could fall. And so I want the barriers there to help me, is one of the first steps in preventing a fall. So.
Yeah. Amen. Humility goes a long way.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think what I'm hearing you say too is, maybe we aren't seeing it in some of the other spaces, and that's okay. I think this is really an opportunity for churches and ministries to lead the way. I mean, we would say that all the time, like churches and ministry organizations should be the ones setting the highest standards, right? Like, not that we're, again, aiming at perfection or anything like that. We've got to approach that with humility, but we should be, I think, setting the highest standards when we're representing Christ.
Very much so. And so I know when I stepped into the role of GLN, I think some of the standards, there was such an expectation that, men and women are equal. We are having such a high standard that we don't need checks and balances. And yet, obviously we do. And so when I stepped into the role at GLN, I had lots of expectations of me at LCBC. And so I stepped in with those same expectations at the GLN. And so again, some of them you kind of bump up against business people that were used to a different set of standards before I came. And so then I'd kind of go, am I being prudish this way? But to your point, I think by us living up to some of those expectations and saying, here's my personal practice, then I think it helps elevate, or at least maybe it makes somebody in business question, do we need to have similar, or do we at least need to question the expectations and the way we behave around others? And so I think, to your point, we can set the bar, we can set the standard if we choose to. So.
Yeah, no, that's right. Setting the bar, setting the standard, all of that does go a long way in enhancing trust. And so one of the things would love to kind of hear your take on too is, what about leaders who've stepped into an organization where there has been some kind of a breach of trust, a leadership failure of some kind that has had an impact on trust? What advice would you give leaders who are stepping into a situation like that, and for the organization as they're working to rebuild trust? What would you say?
Yeah, well, again, I think transparency is huge. And so being able to have honest conversations with people, I think having a set of expectations is important. I also would caution, though, about going overboard with the expectations. We tend to swing on a pendulum, and so something happens to one side, and so then we almost set such tight guidelines that it's really not realistic. And so being careful not to overreact, but that's usually not always the case. I think it's usually just then create some kind of expectations that will hopefully keep this from happening again. And there's nothing that's foolproof. I mean, there's always, what's interesting to me with accountability groups and partners, and I know people that just, you got to have an accountability partner. And if we want to lie, if we're stepping over the line in certain areas and we're willing to do that in secret, then we're also probably willing to lie to our accountability partner. So my point is there's nothing that's going to fail-proof us and keep us from stepping across the line. But the more checks and balances there are, then I think it's going to prevent a lot of places to fall if we know we're accountable. And so setting up some accountability steps, I think, is real wise. And so making sure there are things in place, being willing to talk about it openly. It's hard with the past because we don't always know everything that happened in the past, and there are lots of discussions of what could have gone on before. And so at some point you have to say, okay, we're going to stop dealing with the past. Let's just talk about now, and let's talk about the future, and just make sure we're not setting ourselves up to fail again.
Yeah, no, that's all really good in terms of having those processes in place. I appreciate what you shared too about regardless of sort of what's those processes that are in place, like although they're wise, they're important to establish. Leaders in certain situations can push past those. And so I'm curious, what would you say too for boards of organizations, those that are coming alongside leaders? Because so much of this is also comes down to kind of a heart issue for leaders and the place of health that they may be in. What can those that God has kind of put in places of influence alongside leaders, how can they also be helping to invest in caring for the heart of the leader so that, like you said, of course, they can't control whether or not a leader pushes past those things, but how can they be also maybe even going beyond processes, looking at the heart of the leader and saying, hey, how can we truly invest in the heart and the well-being of this person so that hopefully they're not pushing past some of those processes that have been put in place?
Well, you used the word earlier, humility. And I think just watching the leader and saying, okay, do we see him, her exhibiting any sense of humility in their ministry? And it doesn't matter the size of the church or the organization. In ministry, you can get accolades from all kinds of people, and it could be a church of 50 people, and there's still 50 people saying you're the greatest in the world, and you're helping me in my walk with God, and so it's real easy to listen to that and start believing it if you're not careful. And so I think just checking that sense of humility, and is it there? Is it not there? Is this person starting to believe what the people are telling them? And I don't think it's the board to try to knock the pastor or the leader down several notches. I'm not saying that. But I think there are signs you can watch for the way the person talks, who else they're surrounding themselves with. There's things like that you could start seeing that you say, man, I'm a little bit concerned here. Or just meet with that leader frequently enough, that they truly do know what's going on. And they do truly, they show up at church enough. There's some board models where, well, I may be starting to stray here. So
no, you're good. This is all good.
It's a national organization, or it's national leaders that come once a year to meet with that leader, but they're not involved every Sunday. They don't see what's going on during the week at the church or the organization they're leading. And so are the are the board members involved enough in the ministry that they can actually watch and they can sit back on Sunday and see who's circling the pastor and see who seems to be hanging out all the time. And you just pick up on things, I think. And so one, I guess, encouragement would be involved in the ministry enough that you're not just listening to that leader give reports every couple of quarters, but you really don't know what's going on. So active involvement in the ministry, listening to what people are saying around them, watch, is there that sense of humility there? And then actually having written guidelines. And I know, Michael, one of my encouragements to the ECFA was, I love what you guys have written thus far. Does it need to be a little bit more detailed? And I know your encouragement was, well, that's probably up to the individual boards, but I think there is more that individual boards can do in their context that they think is appropriate. And again, as long as we keep remembering, these are boundaries, these are guardrails that's there to help the person and protect the person, not because we think they're some awful person, but we know, just like anybody, they're susceptible to sliding off the road. And so let's put guardrails up to protect them as much as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, those are some good words about board members remembering to stay engaged. Yeah, part of why, I think it's been wonderful. There's just, even in the history of ECFA from the very beginning, having a governance standard and ensuring that the boards are exercising responsible governance been kind of a requirement of the ECFA standards all these years. And you just look back and say, wow, that was wisdom to include those standards. And in a lot of ways, this is kind of an extension of that. I'm also curious. And
Michael, I'll just say too, the benefit of having those standards written down is then if you find yourself in an environment where it could be questionable, then it actually helps me to blame it on the board and say, you know what, we just have these standards that I have to follow. Therefore, I can't have that meeting, or I can't do this or that. And then I don't have to feel so much like a prude. It's the board's fault. But it gives me an excuse sometimes. And as foolish as that may sound, it actually is beneficial sometimes to be able to say, yeah, it's just something the board has asked us not to do. And so it makes it easier for me to uphold those standards oftentimes by being able to say that.
Yeah, to have those guidelines in place.
Yeah.
I was also curious too, because you talked about the importance of boards watching for these things in a leader. What would you say too for a board member who maybe has, a check about something, they have a hunch, there's just something that's in their spirit, maybe not totally settled, but we've seen it before too, where they're like kind of on the fence, right? Of like, do I say something? What is appropriate? When to step in? Do you have any advice about that? I mean, if you're a board member of an organization and when is a good time to say something?
Yeah. I would imagine, Michael, what's hard is oftentimes the person's in that board position, maybe because that leader placed them there or invited them there. They're in the organization. They appreciate that leader and they hold that leader in high regard. And so to question something could feel real awkward. But again, it's the mindset. Am I questioning because I'm accusing that person of something, or am I questioning because I just want to protect that person? And so my encouragement would be have a conversation, but not even in the board meeting, but ask outside of the board, is everything okay? This is what I'm seeing. I just want to make sure we're okay. I would strongly encourage not to have side conversations in the organization, but we constantly talk about how to communicate truth with grace. And so if I were concerned about something you were doing, then just say, Michael, let's just talk here. And this is something that I'm seeing, and should I be concerned? Should I not? I would think, and the person in your mind, if I question that, then you're going to think, oh, okay, either I'm doing something that looks wrong or I am doing something that is wrong. And so it would cause me to check my activities. If I was stepping out of line, maybe unintentionally or maybe purposely, then it might cause me to back up and say, okay, I'm sorry. I can see where you might think that. So having that direct communication with grace, I think, is real important. The thing I wouldn't do or encourage is for me to tell everybody else in the organization that I'm concerned about this without ever having that conversation with you first. And I think oftentimes in church world especially, we're real good about talking behind each other's backs. And I just strongly believe that one of the most detrimental things that can happen to an organization is when everybody starts talking behind each other's backs. So again, just communicate truth with grace. And I'm just here as a friend and just want to be sure that we're okay. And here's what I see, but I could be wrong. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's such a key point. And I take it, you probably, in raising that point about cautioning against side conversations, it's probably something that you've seen take place over the years. What is some of the damage that's done when there's those sideways conversations as opposed to, folks addressing it directly with the leader or whoever it may be?
Well, typically, I think when that happens, Michael, is eventually the conversation we'll have that conversation. But usually it happens because if I don't actually talk to you directly, then I talk to everybody else. At some point, somebody's going to come to you and say, man, do you know, Michael, what David's saying? And so probably instead of me coming to you, you're going to come to me and say, hey, I'm hearing that you're asking these questions, making these statements. And then there's been a lot of relational damage that's happened there. And it wasn't me talking to one other person, it's me talking to one or two other people, but they assume, well, if I'm talking to them about it, it must be okay to talk to other people about it. And so you just have this huge thing that snowballs. And so what it erodes is any kind of trust. You're not going to trust me anymore if I'm talking behind your back. So we've lost trust, credibility. It just really is so damaging to the organization where I could have, and again, it's biblical. If I would just sit down and talk with you directly, then that's going to avoid so many of the other problems. And if somehow you still deny what I think I'm seeing, and if I feel like you're not being truthful with me, then I just keep watching. And if I see it again, then I can call it out again. But yeah, I think there's huge benefits to going directly to the person.
Yeah, for sure. So you touched on the importance of having a trusted relationship is just so key. Trust in these relationships. When it's not there, that's a huge challenge to leaders receiving the kind of care and accountability that we're talking about. Are there any other key challenges that come to mind, David, and how can those be overcome?
Well, I would say a key challenge is for me let's say I'm one of the board members in your organization. I see something I'm concerned about. For me and most people, I hate confrontation. I don't want to have it unless I have to. So for me to build up the nerve, however much time I spend praying about, I need to find the right time to talk to Michael about this. I'm investing hugely in trying to talk to you. And there's a risk on my part. How's he going to respond and things like that. And so I think if we realize the person that's coming to us, they're not probably just doing this off the cuff. They've thought about it. They care deeply about the organization. They care deeply about me, and they highly invested in this conversation. And so rather than dismiss them, rather than just assume they're out after me or, now they're no longer with me, they paid a big price potentially to have this conversation. So take that into account and respect that and realize, man, maybe there's something to what they're saying that I need to be careful of. And so I think it's really leaning into that conversation, not pushing away. And I know for me, if I were to have that conversation, if somebody had it with me, my initial reaction might be defensive. My initial reaction might be to push back. But I would hope that after I do that, I would also be willing to say, okay, but wait a minute, is there some truth here? What do I need to be seeing? How do I need to be behaving differently? Or is there a place where maybe I'm bumping up against that guardrail? And if I keep going this way, then I'm in trouble. So.
Yeah. So I think what you're saying too is just really seeing it as this is a gift. Yeah.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
And maybe it's a little hard to see at first, but yeah, I appreciate what you said because that person very likely, it was kind of even a challenge for them, or a process to overcome of like, all right, I'm going to have this conversation, give this feedback, ask these questions. And that is a gift for all of us when we receive it.
Totally is. And we all know that it's hard sometimes to have certain conversations. When the board of the GLN first approached me about stepping into the leadership role, it was almost 3, if not 4 days before I found the right time to tell Ruth about this offer, because I wasn't sure how she was going to respond to it, if she thought it would be a good thing, if it's going to take me away. And
were you flipping all the light switches? I'm just kidding.
I should have tried
back
that.
to your story.
But you know how it is in our marriages where if everything's going great, then you think, well, I don't want to say anything to disrupt it. It's wonderful right now. Why would I disrupt things? If it's not going well, then why would I want to say something that may make it worse? And so you just keep looking for the right time. And that happens in our marriages, but it happens with board members and in our ministries where man, the ministry is going so well right now. I don't want to say anything or do anything to disrupt what's going on. So I'll just wait. I won't have this conversation. Or if it's struggling, then man, I don't want to do anything to add to the struggle. So I'll just wait on this conversation. And we keep waiting for the perfect time. The perfect time rarely comes. And I know for, again, my conversation with Ruth about the GLN, after about 3 days, I thought I just need to just say it. And the funny thing is, once I said it, she was like, oh yeah, it's a no-brainer. I would have thought that was going to happen. And so just being able to go ahead and have the conversation. But I think also, Michael, we contribute to that. Are we open to those kind of conversations? Do we tell the board members, you can come to me? And, I would often say, I want to hear what you're thinking. I may be mad at first whenever you tell me what you're thinking, but I'll get over that. And then I can start dealing with it. And so, yeah, I think it's more important that we hear the truth, and we need to be open to it as well and let people know we're open to it.
Yeah, making space for that. I think that's really good. Very practical. One of the things we've seen too, David, and the ECFA members that we've talked to that are kind of already pioneering the way in this space, a lot of them will have some sort of a dedicated, like a board committee, that this is their responsibility of, providing care for the leader and having these kinds of conversations. And so something even as practical as just having those meeting times on the calendar, it's carving out that time. It's creating space for, I think, exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, great. Well, I know as we're kind of coming here, bringing the conversation to a close, I think it'd be great to just full circle, David, you alluded to at the beginning, just some of the challenges that a lot of folks are experiencing in leadership, some of the isolation and things that are out there. If you could just give one piece of advice to leaders today, especially maybe those who are feeling weary in leading during these times, what would that advice be?
I would probably say I'd use the word intentionality, Michael, and be intentional about putting yourself in relationships with other people. I tend to be very introverted, and so I don't think I need relationships oftentimes, but I do. And I need them in different ways. Ruth is probably my greatest accountability partner, and she is great at asking me questions. I've learned now, we've been married 46 years, and I've learned to trust her radar. And if she feels like something is not right, or it's not right in somebody in the church, and that could be a man, that could be a woman, but she goes, oh, that's somebody I'm not sure. I just don't feel good about that person. I've learned over the years to trust that. And so is there somebody in your life that you can speak with that is going to give you that? But intentionality of, again, looking for other mentors to talk to, intentionality and just other pastors, if you're a pastor, or other business leaders, if you're a business leader, to be able to talk into and say, here's what we do. What do you do? What are you learning? I think those kind of things are real critical. So I'd probably just say intentionality and make sure that you're leaning into other people relationally. Because again, once we isolate, it's easier to kind of dig in further and further and further. I think it was John Acuff just recently that I was talking with, and John was just talking about the mindset that we can develop where all of a sudden we start thinking everybody else is the one that's out to get you, and everybody else is the villain, and you're kind of the only person that's, upholding the truth. And once we start getting that mindset, then that's probably a sign that there's a problem here, because we're probably not the only one that's upholding the truth. And it's kind of like the Elijah story. I'm the only one here that, still loves you, God, and following you. And there were thousands of others that were still following God at that point. And so that isolation just digs us deeper. And the deeper we go, the more trouble we get into, I think. So intentional about relationships.
Yeah, that's a good word. Intentionality. None of us just sort of stumble or wander our way into health, do we?
Exactly. I wish we did, but you're right. No, we don't.
It doesn't work that way.
Unfortunately not. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, David, thanks for being intentional with us today. Thank you for your time and your insights. We really appreciate it. Appreciate
Good.
you.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks for the opportunity, and thank you for what you guys are doing and helping, leading, and guiding. We appreciate that very much.
You too. Keep up the good work.
Thanks, Michael. You as well.
Thanks for joining us for the Behind the Seal podcast. If today's episode challenged you, share it with someone and start a conversation. We'll see you next time.